This is the City of Easley Council meeting for June 8th, 2020. It is 7 p.m. and I do want to call the meeting to order and make a note that Councilman Moore is out tonight. He is not feeling well. He's had some outpatient surgery, so what I'd like is if Councilman Dykes would do us an invitation and include him in the invitation of getting better.
Very good. All right. Please bow with me for prayer. Lord, we're in troubling times now, and please make us tolerant, make us compassionate of a fellow man. First of all, protect us from the coronavirus, both in our nation, in our county, and in the city of Easley. Not only in the effects of the medical effects of the coronavirus, but also the disruption to our livelihood and our commerce in the area. Be with all those that are sick, and be especially with the Councilman Terry Moore at this time, and protect them and make them well. And finally, please give us the knowledge and give us the wisdom to, as a council, to do what is best for the residents of the city of Easley. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Approval of minutes as written. You should have two sets of minutes, one being the May 11th meeting and the other being the May 14th meeting. Those minutes are there. If I hear no objections, we will stand for those approved. Report from council members. Ward 1.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Hopefully that's close enough, Lisa. Everyone can hear me. First of all, the rec committee met a couple weeks ago, and we accepted the proposed Phase 3 plan for opening our parks. Of course, not everyone was happy about that decision, but we feel it was a fair and conservative and a safe plan. So we will continue to monitor that as we go forward. Secondly, I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but Kent alluded to it in his prayer, but you know, just saddened and sickened by what happened a couple weeks ago. And I just pray by the grace of God that our country and our state and our county and our city can have real and meaningful change occur. I do want to give a shout out and kudos to those 4 young people who organized the demonstration. Job well done there. And also kudos to Tim and the police department and our first responders and all the staff that was involved in that. Job well done. And I'm proud of our police department and their professionalism that they've shown over the years. So I did want to say that. And lastly, happy early July the 4th, since we won't meet until after. That's all, Mayor.
Thank you. Ward 2.
Well, the Councilman Garrison took a lot of what I was going to say, but I also want to commend Chief Tollison and the police department for the way they handled the protest and the recognition last week. And also, I know that they were sort of behind the scenes, but the Sheriff's Department was also very helpful in that. But they showed good restraint, and our police department, I'm proud of them because of the relationship that they have with all of our citizens in the community, which goes a long ways. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Ward 3.
Well, the wind has been taken out of my sails. I was extremely pleased and proud of the way the demonstration went and the response that happened. I was amazed that the 4 young women were able to put that together and put it together so quickly and do such a good job. The restraint that was exhibited there with the one heckler, all of that absolutely grand. We did, as I recalled seeing, we had at least 2 people who were overcome by the heat. EMS, we had emergency responders, we had people there to help them very quickly. And I thought, as these things go, it went very nicely. And I'm proud of the way our organization worked with that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ward 5.
I'm basically behind each and every other, the ones that have already spoken, but I have the same piggyback attitude as to thanking the sheriff and his department and the 4 girls that also participated in the march and who got the protest together. And I had made some comments to Chief and Captain about it, and I know that they were going to do a good job anyway. And I hate because I wasn't there because of unseen sickness in the family, and I hate because I missed it. But Miss Pat did keep me, she kept texting me or calling me and letting me know that things were going great. And I saw some things on Facebook that was live, and also talked to the mayor. So I'm very pleased with the city of Easley and how they conducted themselves along with the protesters. Thank you.
Ward 6, Jim.
As usual, I say amen to all of the above. I'm proud of our citizens and the demonstrators, and I'm proud that Easley could show the world that you can demonstrate and express your opinion and do it in a peaceful and respectful manner. And very proud of our police department for the way that they handled everything. Again, showing the world that there is a way to handle these things, and it can be done in a better way. Thank you.
Just one thing to report on my end is the staff and I met today with Lucas Durham, just to let y'all know he's volunteering his time to come in and help us revamp some of our flowers and gardening areas so that it'll be enticing again to the community. He's meeting with us again Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock to ride around and look at some things. So if you see Lucas, just tell him you appreciate what he's doing. And just want to make sure, Jim, did some folks get back in touch with you about in front of the combined utilities intersection out there? Okay. I know I'll let Chief, if you want to speak on that again, they just for information purposes, they were going to call you, because I asked them to, because it's your ward, but there was another pretty serious accident out there. In fact, the lady ran up on the guide wire and went airborne. Somebody run the stop sign again. So if Chief wants to speak on that, just. Okay. Yeah, they just said they were going to reach out to you. I'll sort of leave that up to you. I think the only thing really that's available there, I'm assuming it's a city street. Is that correct?
I believe we did look at that. I believe it was a city street. We got a traffic count done.
Yeah.
See how many cars are actually coming back and forth. But,
Yeah.
other than that, directing a stop sign is the only other option.
Yeah, four-way stop would be the only really other option, yeah. So I'll let you maybe ride through there or something, and then you let me know, or let Eddie know or something, what, maybe your recommendation.
Do you have a recommendation, Chief or Eddie, or, I mean, y'all?
I don't feel like a traffic count's gonna hurt anything. That's what I would do first, is the traffic count. See how many cars, just gonna get the days on the stretch of the roadway.
And we actually purchased the equipment to be able to do traffic counts about 6 months ago, so we can do do a traffic count in the intersection and see how everybody's moving through
All
there.
right. Could we take that step,
Yes, sir.
please? All right, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to the city administrator for his report.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to, as we talk about month to month, just how everything's going, did want to update you on some of the revenue sources that are being affected from the COVID-19 closures. So up in the top left, I have the hospitality tax. And as you can see, we are down about a third of where we were last year for April, which in my mind was going to be the worst month that we saw because everything was completely closed down pretty much for the month of April. These were all due May the 20th. One other thing I will add is we are allowing late payments up until June the 20th with no penalty. So we're hoping some of those that have, where we show the number of payees reduced by 20 or 40 month to month, that some of those are late that will come back in this coming month as things have opened back up. And we've actually had some that have come in already and caught up because they were running a couple months behind because they weren't open or didn't have revenue to be able to do so. Business license, we are about $24,000 ahead of where we were last year. With June last year, we made about $101,000. Through Friday last week, we were about $28,000. So we're on pace to probably hit that unless anything major comes up between now and the end of the month. So that revenue source is looking like it will be neutral to last year, maybe slightly higher, depending on how June comes in. Local accommodations tax, you can see it decreased by about 70%. So we're just waiting until that market hopefully picks back up. There's nothing we can really do to push that. It's just people aren't, without Clemson, I hate to say it, being open or a lot of other stuff going on, there's not people coming through and staying at the hotels. I'm hoping maybe that'll pick back up. We've noticed some Duke Power turbines coming through. Maybe there's some people coming in to do contract work up there. We'll see if that continues. Local option sales tax, we're pretty much about 10% off of where we were for the month of April. But today, year to date, we're still about $45,000 ahead of where we were last year. So again, April is, like I stated, would be where I'd fear would be our worst month in reduction of revenue, just because that's when the majority of non-essential were closed, and that was the governor's stay-home order. So since May, it's come back in, and as we've moved into June, we've seen more and more reopen. So we're hoping we'll see those numbers begin to rebound. Councilman Garrison did talk about the Phase 3 facility plan. I did want to highlight a couple of things. This past Monday, we reopened all the athletic fields for practice with several restrictions that were in place on the number that could attend. They have to track the people who show up. That's per the governor's orders or guidelines that were released. Beginning this Monday, we did open up the car room to 50% occupancy, but we are still in the process of replacing the floor, so it'll probably be late into this week before we have our first user. Amphitheater, picnic shelter rentals, they will be capped at 12 for the smaller picnic shelters like at the Doodle Park, and 20 at all the other shelters that are bigger. Parks, playgrounds, restrooms open. We did place signs out that, play safe, but you play at your own risk because we can't be there to sanitize between each user. And the Bagwell Gym also open for walkers and in-person operation, so you can come in and in-person and reserve a shelter or register your child for fall athletics. Beginning next week, we'll open the athletic fields for games with restrictions. And then two things that we had for August 1st was Old Market Square for rentals and events, and then tournaments, bringing in tournaments for city facilities. One last thing,
Now,
sir, go ahead.
comment or ask a question.
Yes, sir.
In response to with the some of these tax revenues down, do you think that we need to adjust spending accordingly, Mr. Steve?
We have, in the department head meetings, we have talked about reducing expenditures at the departmental level to do so. Looking at the budget report today, most departments are under budget, even projection for the end of the year to be under budget. So I appreciate them stepping in and making sure that they've watched their dollars and cents to make sure that when we get to the end of the year, they have a little money left over in their account that will be able to help make up any lost revenues. Yeah. So, the only other thing I did want to mention is, Chase, I didn't know if you wanted to talk, I'm sorry to throw this on you, about 4th of July and about fireworks, or if you have some input you want to give on that for council. I realize when he said it, we won't be meeting until after 4th of July.
Right. So the 4th of July event this year will just be the fireworks. After meeting in our staff meetings and seeing what other municipalities are doing about their usual 4th of July events, we're only going to do the firework display. We're not going to have any type of food trucks. We're not going to have any type of rides, games, or nothing like that, just so that we can promote anyone who wants to come out and see the fireworks to also utilize downtown businesses and the restaurants that we have downtown. We don't want to invite any type of food vendor outside of the city that's not downtown to come in and serve anybody, just because the downtown businesses and restaurants have suffered a major loss in business over the past 3 months. That's all I have.
And Mr. Steves, and perhaps Mayor Womack, do we have a plan or a proposal for opening these meetings back up to the public?
So the discussion that the mayor and I have had is that we will have a called meeting at the end of this month to adopt the budget so that we can do so by July the 1st, is to allow public comment, but to have people sign up for it and have them come in one at a time to make public comment. But we do not know as of yet whether July or August or what the time frame is for fully opening the meetings back up to the public will look like. And I don't know if you had anything else.
Yeah, the numbers have gone up tremendously. 3 to 4 weeks ago, there was only 17 active cases in Pickens County. Today, I looked a little bit ago, there's 83 active. Some of those is because the church in Pickens opened back up and they've shut back down. Others are just because of the testing process being more, but that's what we've been watching is the numbers that come out every day. Now, those drop off as those people that are sick or go through the 14-day cycle, they drop off. So that's active cases right now is 83. So we just kind of keep an eye on that.
Thank you.
All right, citizens wishing to address city council, we only have one email that has come in to the office for that, and I will turn this over to Mr. Garrison to speak on it.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. Stephen, you want to give a little background, or would you like me to give the background? And I'm happy to, or
I can.
anyone? Okay.
So we received a concern from a citizen who lives in the Turtle Track subdivision on Tortuga Lane about their stormwater pond. The pond was originally built by the developer. It was in the homeowners association's name. Do not think that the homeowner association is existing anymore. So the pond has kind of been abandoned and it's overgrown. And I know our stormwater director has gone out and looked at it. Councilman Garrison went out and looked at it. And we're trying to look at some additional options or look at what we need to do to help them either form a homeowners association to take it back, to begin getting it back in order, whether it's something that council may want to do, but we'll continue to have those conversations as we investigate and look at situation over there.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
If I might, when I got the email, I called Tommy Hendricks at the Greenville County Stormwater Office, and I have sent copies of some proposed wording to you guys, because they've had that happen to several of their subdivisions, and I figured it wasn't the first time it had ever happened. There's the possibility that there may be a homeowners association if you look at the covenants, even though they have no active meetings. So that may be another way we could attack that and help them to create a homeowners association.
Yes, I think we have some decisions to make going forward. It is in bad shape. There's no doubt about that. You can imagine. And I've spoken to the lady, and again, I have been by there. I think it's gonna come down to council, what we want to do, some of the options are. I appreciate that information from Pat. We'll look at all that as well. And see what if there's anything we can do going forward. You know, we spoke earlier, the problem is there's no one there to maintain it. I know the city, we've had this discussion over a couple others. We only have one city-owned retention pond, to my knowledge, in the city. I don't think it's something we want to get in the business of doing, but also have compassion for, you know, what this homeowner's going through, that their house is right beside it, so.
And it also presents a problem for us if it fails, because if that stormwater is unrestricted and goes into the streams, then downstream property owners are all affected by it as well.
Right. So not an easy answer, but we'll certainly continue to look at options going forward.
Mr. Garris, if I
Yes.
could add to you.
Please.
That subdivision in 2008, just as it was complete, and of course, everything failed with the economy, I honestly believe that there never was a homeowner association formed there. And if you remember, Ms. Pat probably don't, Ms. Nancy, but, you know, we had to pave them streets, and we had to forcibly take them streets to put them in our name through the court system. So, yeah,
We did not have
he just abandoned the whole thing.
We did not have a letter of credit or a bond in place to cover that?
We did not, no. No, it had expired. And so, through whatever reason, but we paved them and took ownership of them. And, but the pond has never had anybody that's been over it since it's been built, so.
I have no personal or professional interest in the matter, and I'm not giving legal advice to anyone, but the subdivision restrictions do provide for a homeowners association.
I think they do.
They do.
Oh, good, okay. We got a hook.
Research it.
We'll continue to work on that, yes, sir.
Okay, sounds good. Unfinished business, there's ordinances, second reading. The first one is A, ordinance number 2020-11 to amend 132.05 noise ordinance. I'll turn it over to the administrator to talk about, oh, excuse me, have a motion?
So moved.
A motion? Second.
So, as we discussed last month, this would be to change the hours of construction to allow from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Saturday, and then from noon until 8 p.m. on Sunday. It does outline a little bit on what, clarifies a little bit on what defines an emergency repair that can be done if needed outside of those hours. And it also expands a little bit on allowing the building official or police chief to issue a permit to do something outside of those hours, so long as it's done at least 7 calendar days ahead of time. An example that we always like to use is when they poured a lot of concrete out at the town center. They were able to do that at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and it didn't disrupt anybody, and we were able to permit that. So any examples like that that would come up in the future, we would have the ability to continue to do. And This would be second reading, and so it would go into effect upon council's adoption.
Stephen, any comments after first reading from any citizens or business owners?
I have not heard any. No, sir, none from staff.
I'll call the question.
Have a call for question. All in favor, show the right hand. Any opposed? Passes. Ordinance number 2020-12. This ordinance, I think, is approvable of a partnership between KP Components, correct?
I move that we bring this ordinance up for discussion.
As we discussed last month, this is where KP Components is building their new facility at, on the corner of Highway 8 and Sheriff Mill Road. It is about eight acres. They completed annexation in March and constructing a 50,000 square foot facility that is expandable to 100,000 and creating 47 additional jobs. Construction is pretty well underway. I think they're erecting steel now, and city and county are working together. What this agreement does is allows the city to provide a grant on May 1st of each year that's equivalent to 50% of the permit fees paid to the city of Easley prior to their certificate of occupancy, and 50% of the business license fee paid for the 5 years beginning with their first renewal. After 5 years, this would expire. The only thing that would be in place would be the fee in lieu of tax that would become a partner with the county that would go for 20 years. And like I said, work has already begun on this project moving forward. This would be just to finalize the agreement and allow us to get everything signed and in place. This is second reading, so once it is approved tonight, it would be effective.
Any discussion?
Call the question.
Have a call for the question. All in favor of this ordinance, raise your right hand. Any opposed? Ordinance number 2020-13 to approve a lease agreement between the city of Easley. I think this is the property on Folger Avenue for a parking lot. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
So as we discussed last month, the property in blue is the property we're discussing here. It's owned by Spalding Properties. It is on the corner of Folger and Gulf Street that run across from West End Hall and next to the silos. It also borders our Doodle Trail extension that's on there in green that we completed last year. This would allow us to lease the property for $3,000 per year, which is $250 per month. Initial lease is for 10 years, and it can be renewed or extended should we choose to do so by both parties. As we discussed last month, this would be to put an overflow parking lot for use of the silos, Foothills Playhouse, the trail, everything that would be going on over there within that area. So we're hoping to get close to about 30 parking spaces in there, and we would continue once we move forward and get the lease in place. It would start July 1 and run through June 30th of 2030. And at that point, and the goal would be to, at that point in time, once the lease is in place, is to go ahead and kind of grade it out and look at the right surface, as we discussed last month, to put in there for the additional parking.
This is not directly relevant to this proposal, but only because it's in the same neighborhood. Do we have any plans for that boxcar nearby?
Are you talking about that it's behind the silos?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. That is part of our development agreement with the owners of the silos, and they will be reusing that.
Good.
Call for the question. All in favor of this ordinance, raise your right hand. Any opposed? None opposed. Ordinance number 2020-14, authorizing the sale of real property. I think this is the 4 lots, I believe, that we have so far collected. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Have a motion?
So move.
Have a motion. Second.
As we discussed last month, this is 4 properties and a portion of 2 others. They're highlighted here in blue. 2 of them are on Davis Street, and 1 of them is on Hastings Circle. The other, on the left side of the screen, those are across from Haygood Park on the corner of Old Liberty Road and Liberty Drive. The reason I say part of 2 is because the 2 properties that are right at the corner of that intersection, one of them actually is included in the Haygood Park property, and the other one, as you can see, there's a little it's like a rectangle that goes across Old Liberty Road, so we would have to survey, we would have to survey and partition those out for them to be sold. They're listed here as 112, 120 Davis Street and 226 Hastings Circle. I did go back and look at values as requested by one of the council members. So I went by tax map number, their acreage or square feet, and what the county assessed them at. Those that are in green are ones that did not have assessed value, that I added an assessed value to based on surrounding properties assessment. So you can see the ones on Davis Street and Hastings Circle, they were valued at $25,000 per acre. So I was able to give the one an assigned value. Same thing with the part of 2 pieces on Old Liberty Road. I gave them the same value per square foot as the piece that we own and hold that's 2 acres. Altogether, that came to about $35,000 of assessed value. We have an offer of $27,000 to purchase all properties.
Open for discussion.
So, Mr. Steish, you arrived at those values by comparing the property to adjoining or nearby property?
Yes, sir, that's undeveloped.
Okay. So do you think the value that you arrived at is a reasonable value for those properties?
They would be an assessed value by the county based on their assessment rate. Personally, I would always add in that the value of property is equivalent to what somebody is willing to pay for it. But based on the assessed values at the county, if they were to provide an assessed value, those would be somewhere within the range of what they would provide, based on neighboring undeveloped properties that match these.
Call for question?
Call for a question. All in favor, raise your right hand. Any opposed? That's all of the second readings. Number 9 begins first readings. Ordinance number 2020-15, authorizing the lease of 130 Esther Drive for 1 year.
Mayor, make a motion to bring to the floor for discussion.
Have a motion? Second. Discussion?
So we didn't anticipate being back so quick to talk about 130 Esther Drive. As we recently purchased it and completed, council approved it in February and we purchased it in March. But the owner that we had approved to rent it for up to a year found another property and is relocated. They moved out, I think right before Memorial Day that weekend. So we have an empty property right now. And we don't necessarily want to put it on the market and try to sell it while we're in the process of constructing the fire station next door on the property that adjoins it. Discussion the mayor and I have had is to try to rent it out for 1 year and then turn around, then sell it after the completion of the fire station addition and renovations, whenever we won't have people calling to complain because they're out there tearing up something or erecting steel out there.
Are tractors running when they're not supposed to? And they'll call
Correct.
Or dust blowing across?
Yes, ma'am. All of those things, especially with it being a very tight construction project and site and schedule. So what this outlines would be to allow us to rent it for $900 per month, which is what was originally approved whenever we bought it to lease it to the previous owner. and it would only be for 1 year. At that point in time, the goal would be to sell the property. I did put on here that priority would be given to city employees. I know the mayor's had a couple that have reached out to him that have expressed interest in being willing to lease it. State law does require that council approve by ordinance the sale or lease of any city property. So even though we would be leasing, we would have to have approval to lease it, because when we purchased it, it was not to lease it long-term. It was just to allow the person to live there until they moved. So this would be first reading. Second reading would be at the next council meeting, and then we would be able to move forward after that.
Question, if I might it be judicious of us to put some sort of construction easement just in case something should slide down the hill or get on the property or something like that?
I think we've already had it surveyed and already have the lines drawn as to where our property
A
starts.
slight easement beyond that, just in case?
If it goes beyond that, we'd pretty much be on the house.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, in that case.
I think it was 10 feet off the edge of the house to meet setback
I
requirements is
didn't
where we cut
realize
the
that.
line.
Okay.
So we feel pretty comfortable with where the construction is, that we should be okay. And if it's a city employee that's renting it, I feel pretty comfortable that we can
Sure, okay.
work it out.
Call the question?
I'll call for question.
Call for a question. All in favor of this ordinance, raise your right hand. Any opposed? None opposed. Ordinance number 2020-16, providing for issuance of sale of bonds. I think this is for stormwater, and I'll ask for a motion.
I so move.
Second.
So I'm going to go through a couple pictures here and talk a little bit about where this has come from. So as you can see in some of these pictures, top left, you're looking at Williams Avenue. The bottom left, you're looking at Councilman Garrison's, one of his constant complaints we received, that's Bridgewater. The bottom right is, oh, my mind just went blank.
Williams? No.
No, that's not Williams.
Dogwood?
Dogwood, yes, Dogwood, thank you.
Dogwood falling in.
The one that you are looking at here on the left is over in Huntington South. The one on the right is Oakvale, and the bottom left, I'm not sure where that is, but you can just see it's a hole in an old galvanized metal pipe. What you're looking at on the right is a set of pipe that have offset, the seams have offset, and started to allow water to filter through with a running stream that's through it. Mostly what you're seeing with this galvanized pipe is it reaching the end of life, actually beyond the end of life. And one thing that happens with metal when it sits in water is it likes to rust. And we have a lot of rusted metal pipe that needs to be replaced. So there's about 20 projects that have been addressed throughout the city that have been identified to be addressed by our stormwater director. Some of them you saw pictures of, and they're listed there. They include some Peachtree Street, Bridgewater Drive, which you saw the picture of the water backing up in, Ruth and Tiffany Drive, South 8th Street at Woodside Park, North 5th Street near Fleetwood, still over there near the Toyota used car lot. We have some issues on Peachtree Street over there. Two of these projects, South 2nd Street and Dogwood Lane. Dogwood is currently closed. South 2nd Street is behind Getty's. We have applied for over $700,000 in C funds to just address the stormwater issues. These projects total right now with the estimates we have about $1.6 million. What these would allow us to do is to try to get ahead of these projects by getting them repairing and replacing them before they get even worse and cause sinkholes like happened at Oak Creek, where they cause a road failure like what we're witnessing over on Dogwood or on Williams. So to get kind of where the number is coming from, that tells you where the projects kind of total up to, so you can see where we backed into the bonding number. The city did a $400,000 bond in 2016. That was to reimburse costs that we had in the Oak Creek project that totaled over $1.2 million. We increased the stormwater fee the following year by $4 per year to offset this cost. What we're looking at with this one is proposing, it's a $790,000 10-year bond funding. It will wrap around our current funding, so we will actually pay a little less on this one until the other one's paid off, and then we'll pay off a lot more on this one to complete it. I'll show you that schedule here in a minute. We are proposed for the budget ordinance that we'll talk about here in just a minute to increase $2 per year. And if council decides to move forward with this, should it be needed, council could discuss it looking at potentially another $2 in a year or two to help pay this. But for every dollar we raise, it generates about $15,000 in revenue in stormwater fund. So when we raised by $4, and it generated about $60,000 to pay our bond. So if we raise by another $2, it will put us close to $90,000. And what we're looking at here with our bond repayment schedule is about $30,000 more than that. It'd be between around $120 on average per year. So if you look on the far left, you'll see where it says principal. That would be the new funding. So you would see what the principal payment would be, about $55,000 per year on the new bond. On the current bond, if you look all the way to the right, you'll see the 2016 debt service. That's what our current bond payment is. So if you look at the fiscal total, that is the principal and interest for what we're proposing to finance. We're looking for the first 6 years for it to be almost equivalent to what we did for $400,000. And then after we completely pay off the old one, we would put all of that money towards the new one that we're looking at here that would allow us to actually borrow more money and keep our payments the same over the next 10 years. So you can see they range from anywhere from about $116,000 to $120,000 in there. The funds that we have increased the stormwater fee by would generate $90,000 of this. So we should have funds to offset that through growth. As we continue to see more growth come into the city and our stormwater revenues go up, should help offset in the future this additional expense. Should council decide to next year, we could do another $1 or $2 to help completely pay for this with another couple dollars in the stormwater fee, or not, depending on what revenues look like as we move forward. However, my recommendation, and that I feel comfortable with, and what we can afford and what would allow us to address the projects that we have, would be to move forward with this funding of $790,000 in a new stormwater bond to complete these projects and get ahead of a lot of these issues that are existing out there. I know that was a lot of information, a lot of numbers, so I'll be more than glad to answer any questions and go through any line that I need to for council.
Questions? Basically, what Stephen's trying to do is, between stormwater, is putting all these projects together and getting them done, and borrowing money to do it. So, you know, it's I know each one of you probably had complaints about something in your ward. I know we do every day up
Yeah.
here with somewhere, especially if it starts raining real hard. Then that's
Doesn't
when the
even have
phone
to rain
starts
real hard.
ringing.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the other thing I would add to that is, if we were to fund these projects that have been identified year by year with the revenues that we get in, you're looking at a 5 to 6 year schedule to get these projects done. What you're seeing now is, by the time we are working on a project, it's failed. So the goal would be to try to get ahead so that what we're working on in future years is not projects that have failed, but projects that we are being proactive on and trying to prevent them from failing and causing these issues. Because as you know, it's like maintenance on a car. It's a lot cheaper to change the oil, to redo filters, than it is to try to replace a whole engine whenever it fails. When something breaks and fails, the cost goes up significantly versus doing long-term maintenance.
You know how I feel about this. Excuse me, Ken.
No, go ahead.
But, yeah, I'm all for it. Yeah, I think it's due.
I think there's a meeting Thursday afternoon, is that correct, with, to try to get some state money? I think it's at 5:30.
Have they rescheduled that yet? They were supposed to vote in May on the seed fund money, and then they canceled and rescheduled. I think it's,
They pushed it back. He said this morning, or this afternoon, he said it'd be Thursday.
Thursday at 5:30.
Yeah, so hopefully by Thursday, we'll have a
Trying to get
decision
the
on
money
South
to
Second
Dogwood.
and Dogwood.
Yeah.
For how far they will help us with that, which will, if they do, will allow our money to go even further. If not, like you saw with the cost for Dogwood and, South Second, with those costs being as high and depending on what the work's gonna be, we may have to look at those and say, is there ways to do it cheaper? Different options to look at, because if not, those two projects alone would take up almost all this money. So that's where we're hoping the C funds will come and allow these funds to go into to more projects.
Stephen, will we have a good idea by the time we have second reading whether we receive those funds or not?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll know by the end of this week or the first of next week.
Well, I like your approach by being proactive, because there's a lot of little projects out there that just become nuisances to us, and they're very important to the people that are around them, for sure. And the interest rate is what, 2.15? Is that what you think it's going to be?
That is what she's estimating as a conservative number.
Okay.
It should be hopefully lower than that. These would be bank qualified, so they would mean a lower interest rate. And she is always very conservative in estimating that to make sure that she doesn't tell us it's gonna be 120 and it comes in at 130.
Sure.
So I would assume that we would probably be lower than this.
Yeah. Well, I commend you and the Stormwater Department for being proactive on this, because this needs to be addressed. This could be another Oak Creek in the making if we don't nip it in the bud right now.
As reluctant as I am to spend any kind of money, and especially borrowed money, I think this has to happen. I've got plenty of calls, and I've only been elected since January, to keep the community, to be competitive with other communities. We've got to have decent roads, decent stormwater collection areas. We can't let this continue to be a problem. We've got to do something. And I think this is the best thing that we possibly do.
And I will add on that with the debt is this is one of the very few instances in government funding where 100% of the revenue that comes from stormwater goes to 100% of stormwater.
Right here.
So even the revenue, as we do the bonding here, that revenue from stormwater is still working to complete stormwater projects and doesn't go towards anything else.
Mr. Staces, I understand that this would refinance about $276,000 in existing debt.
No, sir, we would not refinance that. What this would do is wrap around that. So as you look up there, you'll see the third from the right is one that says fiscal total. That would be the new bond. The one that says 2016 debt service would be the current bond that we have. So we would actually be paying both bonds down at the same time. The reason being is our 2016 debt service, because the project had already been completed and our revenues were so low, there's actually a penalty for early payment in that bond. So it was not worth the penalty to pay that versus doing this wraparound debt issuance so that we can actually complete the 2016 bond and then put both those together to pay the rest of it off. We're doing the same thing, right? We did the same thing for a hospitality bond with the old bond that we had that expired.
So then would the 800,000 be in addition to the 276?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in Article 6 of the bond ordinance, it says that the funds would be deposited into the 2020 construction fund. And it goes on to say that withdrawals from that fund shall be made only upon written certificate of the city executed by the mayor, the city administrator, or the finance director.
Correct.
And that means that city council would not vote upon those specific expenditures?
No, sir. Just whenever we go to draw the funds down from the bank to reimburse ourselves for the projects, we would just submit those. That's what we would submit.
But would city council approve it first?
You would approve the project before we spend the money. And then once the money's been spent, we would just do a drawdown request and that we would have to we have a form that we fill out to draw that money, because they hold it in escrow account, and we have to, we spend the money, then we have to draw it back. So, right now, once the money actually is spent on a project, one of us can sign to draw that money back.
But if we're gonna spend if the city spends $400,000 to repair, replace, whatever we do, Dogwood Lane, city council would vote on that
Prior to us spending the money.
project and price before it is done.
Correct.
Okay, all right,
And then once it's
That
spent,
takes care
based
of
on
my
your
question.
vote, then we can draw the money back.
all right.
Yeah, we can't just go draw the money, we actually have to show where it's been expended.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Yes, sir.
What is the estimate on all those listed projects? What do you forecast the completion of all those projects to be?
Completion, I would say, depending on whether, if we can get the funds, which would probably come sometime in July, depending on when council approved everything, hopefully by the end of the year. I think that'd be reasonable. The goal would be to bid these
Very good.
out as a large group of projects, to try to get as much done for as little as possible. Excuse me. Because if you put one out here, one out there, you don't get nearly the discount as if somebody's doing 15 projects all at one time.
The mobilization will kill you on those.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the goal would be to put these out as a big, large project list, just similar to what we did with the roads. We put out 40 roads to see what the price came back in, and we could only afford to do, 18 of the 40 roads, but we wanted to see how far our money would go. So we would bid all these projects, and then we would see how far the money will go, come back to council for approval, and then go forward from there.
Okay. That's a good goal. I'll call for the question then.
Call for the question. All in favor, show your right hand. Any opposed? It passes. Ordinance number 2020-17, authorize the conveyance of property located on Brookview Circle. Ask for a motion.
Motion to bring to the floor for discussion.
Second.
I'll refer you back to a couple months ago. I think it was in April, council approved a letter of intent between us and STP Development for the property they're looking to develop on Pearson Road. It backs up to the end of Walnut Hill Drive and then borders as well on Pearson. They proposed us, they've submitted and had plan review for the project for 105 single-family lots on the property. One of the things they wanted to do was do some property trading with the city. We have a piece of property located on Brookview Circle, which is that green in the top right, which sits about 2/3 into a floodplain. However, they need to access Brookview Circle for sewer, and they have asked for that piece of property. In exchange, they're going to survey and deed over to us, I think it's anywhere between about 7 and 9 acres, depending on how we decide to run a trail through there, or what it would look like whenever we're ready to do that. They've already subdivided the land to break off everything from the power line north, or I guess that would be northeast, towards where they would we would work with them on trading property, separate from where they're actually going to be building the houses at. So they have asked if we will go ahead and quitclaim that piece of property on Brookview so they can work with combined utilities on sewer connection and easement, while we work on figuring out exactly what the outline of the property will be for them to quitclaim us back the property for extension of the Brushy Creek Greenway that would go across the road there. So I can answer any additional questions that council may have.
Seeing none, I'll call the question.
Call the question. All in favor of this ordinance, raise your right hand. Any opposed? None opposed. Ordinance number 2020-18 to provide for the adoption of a city operating budget beginning July 1, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. I hear motion.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
So council has in front of them the budget ordinance for fiscal year 2021. I just put about 3 or 4 slides in here to show revenues and expenditures for the public as they watch this or as they have interest. So for fiscal 2021, what we're looking at is about a 1.6% increase in the budget over the previous year. Most of that is coming in increase from local option sales tax, and we're anticipating that things will return maybe not 100% to where they were, but begin their growth back. We are taking into account for using the 2008 through about 2010-11 beginning part of the recession that took place as a guide for what happened to revenues and expenditure over those years. So on the expenditure side, as you can see, about $7.5 million of the budget out of the 15, so just about half goes to provide emergency services, which is police, fire. About an additional close to $4 million goes to provide public works, sanitation, and those services. Recreation takes up about $1 million, and then between council, administration, court, finance, they take up a little over about $1.2 million, $1.3 million between them. The general government line item is made up of things like our wellness program, debt, payments, lease payments, items like that that the city occurs annually. Our IT services come out of that. It's mostly for things that are used by all departments. Special revenue funds, as you can see, we have several of those. Overall, between revenues and expenditures, they are proposed to be balanced this year. There is one new one, and that is the road fee fund. We did start receiving funds from the county based on the road fees that are paid when people renew their tags. And we have started maintaining our own city roads beginning this year. So that is a new revenue source and expenditure source that we did not have last year. As I also talked about during our budget work session, we are budgeting for about a 12 to 13% decrease in hospitality tax to be on the safe side, even though during the recession in 2008 through 2010, we only dropped about 4% throughout that entire 2 or 3 year period. So we're trying to be on the conservative side as we move forward. Our enterprise funds, we've talked about that a lot tonight. That's our stormwater fund. We are showing about a $20,000 increase in there. That is from the $2 that we are proposing to increase stormwater fee by. And then our debt service fund is our tax increment fund. We're not showing it much change in it except for how we recognize the revenue. We do have an agreement with the school district where we only get to keep $50,000 of the revenue. The rest has to be returned. So we've started to recognize only the revenue we get to keep versus the entire thing. I can answer any additional questions or hit on anything specific. Usually when we have the public comment for this, which would be at the called meeting at the end of this month, I would go a little more in depth, but I can address any questions that council may have now.
Stephen, I have a question. I hinted at it through email, I guess, to you the other day, referring back to the budget workshop in regards to recycling.
Yes, sir.
Could you hit on that just for a moment, what our plans were? Because that wasn't, I'm correct, right? In this budget?
In the budget work
Proposed
session.
budget, yes.
Correct, yes, sir.
So I think I missed something possibly.
So during our budget work session, we spent a good portion of the beginning talking about recycling throughout the city and kind of what has led up to recommended changes that staff has recommended to council to make sure there was support for. Most of it has to do with the recycling market in general. Our recycling contractor that handles the county, because we currently partner with Pickens County to recycle. We take all of our recycling to Pickens County. They sort it, bundle it, and then they sell it to a contractor that picks it up. Pratt Enterprises is the company that they contract with. So as they have moved forward and the recycling market has declined, they've gone from being able to generate revenue off of recycling to where pretty much they're charging us to take our recycling now. But that's only one part of the issue. The other part of the issue is contamination within the recycling stream. So whenever people put items that are not recyclable and we pick them up and take them and they see contamination inside the bundle, they'll actually reject it and it goes to the landfill. So not only is there no revenue in it, but everything is so tight in it that any contamination over, I think it's what, 5% or 10% of the bundle, they reject it and it ends up going to the landfill anyway. So to make sure, our discussion was how do we continue recycling to make sure that when people recycle, it actually makes it into the recycle center and is being recycled versus being rejected into the landfill. And part of what we talked about was contamination. So Eddie went out today and took pictures in his neighborhood of what recycling people were putting by the side of the road. And there's used pizza boxes, there's Amazon boxes with stuff in it, there's garbage bag or grocery bags in there. These are all things that when they end up in the recycling causes it to get rejected and ends up in the landfill. So the discussion came about is how can we continue to offer recycling and make sure that it's actually moving forward. So being able to do so curbside has become almost unattainable without hiring additional staff and purchasing additional vehicles, because we would have to sort at the curbside, and we can't do that without additional employees and vehicles. The other option we discussed was to do the convenience center that is manned, and it will actually take about 1.5 positions to man it versus 3 on the recycle truck that it takes to actually run it the way it is now. And we would be able to help people. We would actually sort it for them to make sure that it's sorted correctly, and that so when it gets picked up and taken to the county, it will 100% go recyclable. So the curbside would be eliminated, and we would go completely to the recycle center, which would be located directly behind City Hall here at the old courtesy dump. But instead of being a courtesy dump, it's going to be a courtesy recycle center. And we would make sure that it's staffed so that we can get everything sorted properly, educate the public on what is recyclable, so that when we hopefully do get to go back to curbside, they'll be better prepared for that transition should it ever be able to occur.
If I bring material that I hope to recycle to the new recycling center and it gets rejected, will there be a trash can that I can dump it in there, or do I have to take it home with me?
We will have trash cans so that they can be collected.
That is a good idea.
We'll actually have a trash truck.
Yeah, we're trying to get some trash cans so they don't have to throw stuff in the truck. But yes, sir, we would have a trash truck to be able to compact it and haul it off for you.
And our plan also is to do I think Chase, along with Stormwater, is going to do a commercial with a drone and some other ways to go on Facebook and let people see, you know, what we're doing up here and how it's going to work, and the beginning of that piece of recycling and then where it ends up.
We're also going to be doing, I think we're working on a magnet to send out, similar to what we did for the holidays, to let people know where to recycle at, what is recyclable, you know, and so they can have something they can keep on their fridge and look at whenever they try to make that decision on what to bring up.
Have we thought any, I'm sorry, Pat.
At that part, one of the things that I appreciated hearing Stephen say was when we can begin again. If the recycling market makes it feasible, we could pick it up again. I don't want to lose the momentum that we've had with the children at school, teaching them about recycling. I don't want to lose that completely by just shutting it down. And I think the manned recycle center is a compromise.
Good point, Pat. That's the way of the future is recycling, and we got a momentary blip right here, but we need to be cognizant of way the future's going to be.
Have we thought about hours of operation, possibly feasible to have some hours on Saturday? I see that being an issue with.
We're actually
those
gonna
that work.
mirror the county's schedule. So we wanted to try to make it as simple for people who are currently recycling in the county, is we will actually have their exact same hours of operation. So we'll only be closed on Wednesday and Sunday, and we'll be open Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, from 7:30 until 7:20, which is what they're open, so we can allow people who are working and all, as well, to be able to bring it up at the appropriate time they can.
Thanks.
Stephen, just a procedural question here, and this, bear with me, this may be out of ignorance, but the last city council meeting that we had, we discussed the budget. Is that correct?
We did a separate work session for that following the council meeting, yes, sir,
Okay, so this is the first vote
on the budget.
that we've had.
Yes, sir, we're running about a month late. Normally, we would be doing second reading right now.
That's what I thought.
But with all the uncertainty that's taken place, we wanted to kind of see where things were moving. And like I said, the first draft of the budget that was put together, as the department heads will tell you, looks completely different than what you received as the second draft of the budget after the coronavirus and the shutdowns
Sure.
and everything, and how it affected the local economy.
Right.
So
I
we're
get-
running about a month behind. That's why we'll have a second called meeting this month to finish approving the budget, so we can have it in place by July 1.
I guess, have we had any public comment on it?
This would actually be the first time that the public will have seen it. And then
Alright.
we'll be advertising it in the paper between first reading and second reading. We have an advertisement requirement we have to do. And should council approve first reading tonight, we will post the proposed budget onto the website, because council will have made first reading to say this is what they're recommending to move forward.
I understand now. I'll call for the question unless there's any other.
All in favor of this ordinance, raise your right hand. Any opposed? Ordinance number 2020-19 to amend 1.6 in the city's zoning ordinance. I need a motion.
Motion to bring to the floor for discussion.
Motion, second. I'll turn it over to Stephen and Tommy on this one.
All right, I'll give a little bit of background and then open it up to council for any questions or concerns that they may have. So I'm going to show you some pictures. What you're looking at on here, the one on the far left is a stormwater easement where somebody has boarded up underneath their fence. Also put a board in front of the pipe that leads into the storm drain. I'll let your imagination run wild on what happens whenever it rains. Up on the top right, it is difficult to see, but in the far corner there, they have done the same thing. Underneath their fence, you can see where it angles down to go into the stormwater swell. The bottom right one, I would let you guess on what runs through their yard that they've put a fence in to block right now, that has created about 3 inches of standing water in their yard. You can see on the left here, the water following the stormwater swell right into a fence. On the right, you see where 3 people have brought their fences to property lines, and you can see the water trying to run down the swell there, and the leaves actually creating a check dam that actually backs the water up and disrupts the direction where it's supposed to go. So, how do we fix that? Well, one of the things that we don't have right now is we don't have anything in our policy that, or our development ordinance, or our ordinances, zoning ordinances, or development regs that outline any review of fencing. What staff is proposing here is to allow an administrative approval of fences. Pretty much what we want to do is just review them, make sure that they're not in any stormwater easements, they're not on any combined utility easements or any other easements that may exist, and that they are being done per our code. The biggest issue we're running into in several of these areas where we're having stormwater complaints, and Councilman Garrison can attest to this, is people who have put fences in the stormwater swells, fences, pools, storage buildings, pet houses, and all sorts of stuff inside the stormwater easement or swell, and it's causing the water to move and actually go into somebody else's yard and creating havoc. So the only way we can make sure, now we're having to be on the back end and get with people and have them move their fences versus making sure they were installed properly to begin with. We added it to this section because other things that already have review from from the planning and development, including garages, storage spaces, stuff like that, to make sure they meet setbacks, already are being reviewed. So we wanted to add this in to make sure, so when they come in for review, that we can get stormwater to review and make sure that there are no concerns on the placement. I can answer any other questions that council may have or anything I may have missed that raises a concern.
Well, I do have a concern. I have a couple of concerns, actually. But if you read through the verbiage, we get down to item 7, and it is saying here that you've got to have a review of non-commercial flower, ornamental shrubs, or vegetable gardens. And I just think that's a little rough if you've got to go pay $10 to get a review if you want to plant your petunias. Although, if you are grading, if you are going to use a bobcat and build a flower bed, or if you're going to get out there, there are ways you can stop it up. But I just feel like from an enforcement standpoint, I don't want to see us going in and fussing every time somebody wants to plant a few flowers, even if it's going down into a swale, which might help to stabilize. I would like to see that rewritten to say, the greenhouse obviously doesn't belong in the stormwater easement. That's a structure. But I don't know as we want to get into the petunia police area. So if we could take out the non-commercial flower and shrubs, and then at least go to machine grading within the easements.
So if that's something that the councilwoman would like to do, we can either make an amendment can be requested, or if that's something that council agrees with, I can actually just make that change between first reading and second reading, and I can send it to Councilman Webb and make sure that she's good with the changes as written, whichever method that council, if you would like to move forward that way.
I would be pleased to, if that suits everybody else.
How would this review be triggered?
So, as we've talked about with recycling a minute ago, part of it's going to be an educational process throughout the community. But the other part is right now, planning and development gets calls for people who are going to do a lot of these things and says, is there anything I need to do? And right now, the answer is no. You just need to meet your setback requirements depending on what it is. And this now, when they get those calls, they would say, yes, actually, there's administrative review. You need to come in and tell us what you're doing. And we've talked about, like I said, doing a $10 permit fee or something like that. Just something enough to cover calls for for Eric to go out on site and look and make sure what they're doing, or have review between Eric and Tommy to make sure it's not going to be an easement.
So you'd have to apply for a permit to plant your garden.
Based on the way it's written now, yes. Based on what Ms. Webb was talking about, she would want to remove that. And I'll tell you, we discussed this afternoon, is the reason that's in there is, as you can see, this is an existing ordinance that's in place, is I did not remove anything. I just added the fences in there and saw the greenhouse and did not think about the shrubs and vegetables and think about the issues that may cause. And that's why we have 2 readings on this, and that's why when you get 7 people looking at something, you get sometimes better ideas than just one.
Would this
Good.
apply to pre-existing structures or uses?
No, sir. This would be for future uses. Pre-existing ones, we're actually having to go back and get them to fix now. So this would be trying to prevent that in the future.
What enforcement could there be against existing uses if they're in an easement?
if they're in an easement, by law, we can require them to move it from the easement or move it ourselves. Yes, sir. Same as combined utilities, Duke Power. If you build something in their easement, they ask you to move it or they will move it themselves. We don't want to be mean. We want to ask people and try to assist anywhere that we can to help them move it. But at the same time, there are several issues that we've received complaints on. And when I say several, I think we counted, we're over 24 of them between two neighborhoods, where the majority of them are caused by people placing stuff in our easements and diverting the water onto neighboring properties. So this has become a major issue, and it's what we want to prevent is in all these new developments that are coming in, that we keep it from becoming an issue with them moving forward.
Another thing that bothers me is that in every new subdivision we have, there's a 5-foot drainage and utility easement on either side of the property lines. And I'm hoping that when we review this and you look, many times there's no water going in those easements. My visual image is that we have a fence on the 5-foot line on one house and a fence on the 5-foot line on the other house, and we have a dead spot that's 10 feet wide in between each of these houses. I'm thinking that if we need the water to run there and it's a swale, that's one set of circumstances. But I certainly hate to think that a new subdivision is going to have this dead trail in between each house, and more folks are putting up their privacy fences. As the lots get smaller and smaller, more privacy fences are required.
And who cuts that grass?
Yeah, right. And, you know, I don't want to see it carried that far. So if there is a review, then can we not exercise?
And that would be what the review is for him to go on site, or whoever to go on site and review it. The other issue is we have some easements, like one that we're looking at now actually is a 20-foot easement, and people have built a pool in the easement.
And that's a stain on their title.
So, so that's where, and again, we have easements that were not enforced 20 years ago or 10 years ago when there was a drought. And now we're having new springs come back up, and we're finding that a lot of these fences that went to property lines are now creating the issues. But I think that's where having somebody review it and they give their, they would be able to go and make those determinations on site. And that's where the administrative review comes in, is they would actually go on site and look at what they're wanting to do before approving. And we would try to turn that around within a day or two. Because usually when somebody comes in and wants to get something like this done, they're ready to move forward next day or so.
The idea that the fence contractor might get caught for operating within the city limits without having a permit for him to operate would be another thing we might catch.
That one's gonna be very hard, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
So, but if we have one fence, like Pat said, and the other fence is gonna be 10 foot from that one, which is gonna leave a void area for somebody to cut the grass, are we gonna deny that second fence so that it'll stay open and that man cuts the grass?
Well, we can't take the
No.
property away.
I mean, right now, the way it is now is if there's a 5-foot easement, if they put their fence on the outside of it, they still have to cut it.
And I don't want there to be no misunderstanding unless I'm told different. But if it's drawn up that there's a 5-foot easement, we're gonna go by the easement, there's gonna be a 10-foot there. We're not gonna say, well, there's no water running down this one today. I'm not gonna say that. Because when it does run down in 6 months, who's gonna be to blame?
And that's what I'm saying, is there's ones that we may have allowed 10 years ago that are now, with the rain that we've had the last 2 years, are causing issues. So just because it's not an issue today doesn't mean that when we get an inch of rain in an hour in the next week, that it won't be an issue.
Are we gonna also be able to regulate the space that's left between the bottom of the fence and the ground to help alleviate some of this stuff that you saw in the picture?
Yes.
So that-
Technically, they're supposed to do that now. If they do run it across the swell, they're supposed to leave a gap underneath there to allow the water to
That'd
run,
be only if it's in the swell.
if it's in the swell.
If it's
So
in
if
the
it's
yard,
not in the swell,
we don't care.
And the difference is there's a privacy fence and it creates a dam. If you space the pickets out, it may create a different discussion that may take place versus putting a privacy, so there's different fence styles and different options and.
And they can all get clogged.
Well, and
unfortunately.
right, and there's a difference between going out and pulling the leaves off of a chain link fence versus not being able to remove anything from a solid double-sided
Right.
privacy fence. So that's where the review comes in, is because if they're wanting to put in a 4-foot tall picket fence that may have 4-inch gaps between it, they may be allowed a little leniency. But if they're gonna put a privacy fence that is gonna be nothing but solid, the leniency may not be there because that creates more of a impediment to water than a chain link or a picket fence may create. So that's where the review would come in, and that's why they would need to go out and look at it and make sure what they're wanting to do and what the property looks like and the easement. And again, you want to lay eyes on it.
Well, from a homeowner standpoint, if we are leaving that gap between them, that's gonna double the cost of your fencing. Right now, you can share a fence with your neighbor.
Technically, you're not supposed to.
Not supposed to, but it's done.
And that's what we're running into, is those are the ones that we're having to fix. Not so much on the sides, but more so on the rear.
Rear, yeah. We need to do something. I agree with that, and
I think the biggest complaints I feel like that y'all gonna get is the same-day permits will be done away with for any additions, garages, or fences. I just want everybody to understand that, where they used to be able to come in, depending on Eric's off, I'm off, what have you. There's gonna be a process that this homeowner has to go through with this builder that's gonna be different. So I just, as I told Stephen, it's gonna be different for them.
and the $10 fee we think will, you have a fee in mind that will cover this expense.
Well, yeah, $10, $20, that's all we've talked about doing. Our biggest thing is that it's not to generate revenue, it's just to have something to try to cover staff time to ride a truck out and look at a piece of property for 30 minutes and drive back.
Would there be a stipulation in there that 5 days go by and we haven't done our part, that it can be permitted?
I would say less than that. I would say 48, 2 to 3 days.
48 to 72 hours.
Could we put that amendment in as well?
I can add that between now and
Or-
second reading.
Okay. That would help.
Yeah. That way it won't hold somebody up.
So what I've heard is between now and the second reading, if council decides to approve first reading, would be to remove everything except for the greenhouse under item 7 and to add say a 3-day maximum period for the permitting.
I would also like to see that there could be no machine grading
Okay,
within that easement area.
we can do that.
Plain or posy, okay, but don't bring your Bobcat in and regrade.
Call the question.
I'll call for the question. All in favor of this ordinance, raise your right hand. Passes on first reading. Resolutions, number 10, resolution number 2020-12, certifying the property located at 105 Stewart Drive as abandoned buildings. Ask for a motion.
I so move.
Motion,
Second.
second. Okay, Terry.
If you'll look at the picture, everybody should recognize what this property once was. It was the old Getty's Middle School. We have somebody who submitted site plans to turn this property into apartments. And as we've talked about before with the Abandoned Buildings Revitalization Act that was created, it was to incentivize redevelopment of abandoned buildings. To meet that, 66% of the buildings have to be abandoned and closed for business for 5 years. As we know, this property was never used for business. It's been it was institutional use as a middle school. Since the developers have bought the property, they have signed an affidavit stating that no business operations have occurred on this site for the past 5 years. And through Through our licenses and permits, we can find no business that occurred at this site for the last 5 years. So we're asking council to certify it as abandoned underneath the South Carolina Abandoned Buildings Revitalization Act so that they can access tax credits for revitalizing this property.
What's good use for the property? Are they gonna tear it down, or are they gonna remodel it as is, or do we know?
The current plan is to remove the buildings off-site, or demolish the buildings on-site and rebuild.
Okay.
I think you already have a number of apartments, correct, Tom?
That is correct. It'd be a little, what was it, 220, 224, something, 220.
Call for the question. Call for the question. All in favor, show your right hand. Any opposed? None opposed. All right, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Per the law, they are.
Hi, Matt. Good, how you doing? That's good. Came home yesterday, so he's doing good. Yeah. No, we're good. Just thank you guys for all that you have done and continue to do. We appreciate you guys. Bye-bye, you have a good one.